You can't give yourself a nickname. It's impossible. I've tried. When I was a youngin', I badly wanted a nickname and I tried really hard to make it stick, but when your birth name is a single syllable, snappy combination of sounds like Nash, it's hard to get more succinct. Now this might sound like a very weird thing to open on given that most of you know me by Moose Bones, a name I very obviously gave myself, but player tags carry on the long tradition of call signs and radio handles of yesteryear, wherein a certain level of anonymity is preferable to the familiarity that comes with the birth of an organic nickname. They're similar, but the tag is something you give yourself to create distance, while a nickname is something someone else gives you to eliminate it. There's something innately cringe-inducing in giving yourself a nickname that isn't present in giving yourself a tag. One you come by naturally, while the other is definitionally contrived. Doing so signals a desperate need to belong, and while we can look at this empathetically and sympathetically, it's in our nature to see it as weird. In Monster Rancher, there are only so many different combinations of techniques and stats you can give a monster before you exhaust what's possible, but sometimes when someone hits on something really unique or special, the community inducts it into the common lexicon. The JP build is a catch-all for any low damage build that focuses on resource control instead of winning by KO. Based on competitive OG and Combo Breaker 2025 Monster Rancher 2 champion JP and his tenacity in trying to force an archetype that would be cool if it worked but fundamentally doesn't over and over again. He wasn't the first person to try this, and he probably won't be the last, but his affinity for this genuinely bad type of build has resulted in his name being synonymous with it. The Sussy Germa build is a phenomenally powerful Raki build in the lightweight format, named not after Germa himself, but rather the monster with this name. Player Heel Slime realized he could take a monster who uniquely doesn't need to rely on skill to hit, since a few of Raki's techs are so accurate, and instead pump those wasted points into speed for a significantly more defensive monster than the format usually allows for. The Bogwater build by Macho Cheese is a cocooned worm turned into a gel that has 3 cubes without its prerequisite gel cube. Through careful tech manipulation and this one specific worm spawn that has techs it normally shouldn't have. A lot of my older videos used joke names for builds that were never actually used by anyone in the scene, and unsurprisingly, they didn't stick. One, because they were just throwaway bits that made me laugh and not intended to be taken seriously, and two, you cannot give yourself a nickname. That said, today we're taking a look at a monster who has a build named after me. Mew is a monster who is always on the precipice of greatness, but has a few things holding it back. When I first joined the scene and started playing on hard mode, I remember reading the mod creator Alkeus' thoughts on all of the monsters. Things have changed over the years, and DX is a fundamentally different game than the PS1 version in a competitive sense, but something he mentioned was that Mew was a highly underrated monster. This has always stuck with me because even 6 years later, I think it's still true. Mew is a monster that is very powerful and has options in its kit to beat any opponent, but because it requires a strong reading of the meta to function at this level, and is saddled with really weak basic techs, it can tend to be inconsistent. Its stat gains make for a strange casual raising experience similar to Color Pandora, who is also extremely powerful but requires a bit of game knowledge to function. Looking at these stats, it's probably not surprising to hear that one of my first monsters to beat B rank as a kid was a Bow Wow that I just pumped like 700 skill and speed into and had nothing else going on. Mew's guts regen rate is below average, which offsets its relatively high technique strength in what's more often than not an overcorrection, and this would be remedied by another overcorrection in Monster Rancher 3 by giving it pixie level guts regen and making it a total menace. Monster Rancher 3 is sick, by the way. It's better than you remember, and there are tournaments for it happening right now. It's fun. You can give your guy a little hat and mustache. But anyway, Mew's basics suck. Punch doesn't do any damage, and it feels like it takes an eternity to finish animating for a monster with Mew's guts rate. You never want to see it used. Leaping Kick is worse, and absolutely does not need to cost 12 guts for what it does. It's got a bit of sharpness though, which will be a theme throughout Mew's kit, as Mew, just like Kato, relies a lot on its critical hit rate to really ramp up its efficacy. Not a lot of monsters can lean into sharpness, so it's kind of funny that we're doing 2 in a row. Felines of a Feather. Diving Press is arguably one of Mew's weaker power techs, but it has notable sharpness for a heavy tech. It's also not super inaccurate, so it ends up being a low-cost tech without a whole lot of risk. It's best used in builds where Mew goes out of its way to pick up all the sub-20 guts cost techs, in an attempt to run something that eschews high damage for more chances to attack. Rushing Punch is essentially the same thing, but bigger. Not a lot of heavy techs push up against the 50-50 hit chance, which makes Rushing Punch's 47% chance to hit an outlier. It also doesn't have particularly high damage for the cost or for a heavy tech, but it gives Mew a few options if it finds itself with a guts advantage. Stab is a withering tech which suffers not really from its numbers alone, but from the opportunity cost of the slot it's in. While it's a better choice to swing in basically every scenario than Leaping Kick, both Rushing Punch and the next tech we're going to look at tend to completely outclass it. The numbers are fine, but you're getting this tech for the novelty more than anything else. Scratch isn't huge damage, but the great hit percent and good critical hit rate help boost it beyond its raw numbers. This is a tech where Mew's slow guts rate really shines, because while it may not get as many chances to swing techs as some other monsters, the extra hit chance and damage that comes with Guts Correction patch up the holes that would otherwise exist on Scratch. Headbutt has the same amount of force, but potentially 43% critical hit rate. It ends up being well worth its price, and way above cost on a crit. Head Assault is maybe a bit behind the curve Headbutt is on if you look at the cost, but sometimes you only have the chance to swing one attack. In that scenario, 20 force with 45% chance to crit is way more meaningful. If you pick up some of Mew's higher cost and higher damage techs, you can probably forgo this, but at worst it still covers up punch, so it's a common grab. Twiddling is another sharp tech that, while not really crazy numerically, is relatively cheap and not particularly risky. It's probably never going to be the most meaningful move swung in a match, but it's serviceable, which is good because it's a prerequisite for our next tech. Twiddling 2, at least in the year 2025, tends to be Mew's main source of big damage. It's got about the same ratios as Rushing Punch, whose sole purpose is to tack on damage, with the added bonus of nearly 50% critical hit rate with the bad-natured stress bonus. -7 hit can be a liability occasionally, but almost S-force damage half the time it lands really makes up for this. Twiddling Z? I'm saying Z. It's not Z, there's a trade war on, so it falls on me, I suppose, Canada's strongest soldier, to keep up the fight. Twiddling Z is the final tech in the chain, and it kinda falls off a cliff numbers-wise. Mew torqued a little too hard on this one. Should have stayed in Gear 2 instead of shifting up to Gear Z. The damage gain is notable, but the huge jump in cost really offsets whatever bonus you actually gain from landing it if it doesn't KO, or, God forbid, even crit. The numbers honestly aren't awful in a vacuum, but on 15 guts rate the cost is borderline prohibitive. Especially since 100 blows is 11 more guts for more damage and a huge 21% additional hit chance. Way less of a gamble than Twiddling Z, but you're really paying for consistency. Oftentimes this will feel way too expensive for what it accomplishes, but it's often worth it to have something reliable to close out games with. To put it another way, this is like a slightly more expensive version of Naga's Turn Assault, just stuck on a monster with Mew's guts rate. Million Blows is a game winner, offset by the fact it costs 55 guts, so a miss is essentially equal to a loss. The numbers on Million Blows are great though, and it's easily one of the best techs in the game that costs more than 50. Even though it'll often break 60% chance to hit, there is an extremely all-in vibe to the tech, so if you're gambling folk and can stomach the risk, you'll win a lot of games with this. All of Mew's intelligence techs are in slot 4, which makes it a bit of a non-starter as an intelligence build, but as we'll see, this ends up giving it some interesting options in mixed attacker builds. Meow is the single most accurate withering tech in the game. It withers slightly more than it costs, so the real reason to use this is to stop stuff like Cyclone and other instant game winners from getting online at round open. Occasionally you're even putting yourself at a disadvantage because your opponent will build their guts back faster than you will. It's a very nuanced and an interesting control tech that is unfortunately kinda useless in the hands of AI. It's also got the dubious honor of being the weakest tech in the game capable of doing damage. Song of Mew is well worth the cost, an okay chunk of damage and very accurate with obscene withering. But it costs the same as Twiddling Z, and its best use case is just to build a small lead at round start or to punish an opponent who just missed an attack and is trailing on guts. The opportunity cost of spending 40 guts just to wither, no matter how accurate, is pretty awful, outside of scenarios where you already have a lead. It's a great example of how a tech's values don't necessarily tell the whole story. Nothing about the numbers fully explains why you dread to see your cat using Song of Mew, but it'll happen, and you'll cringe when it does. Recital is a fascinating tech because it's pretty hard to acquire as the third tech in a chain of very expensive techs on a slow guts rate monster, so you gotta do a ton of tournaments to get enough uses for it, so it's not often seen even in casual play, and to top it off, it's not particularly good. But despite this, it also became the foundation for Mew's entire personality in every subsequent game. Mew's gimmick of the singing, dancing, performing cat wasn't even present in Monster Rancher 1, and it's barely seen in 2, but that's its whole thing from this point on in the franchise. Again, the numbers are fine, but it's really not something a 15 guts rate monster wants to swing. Zap is huge damage and withering with really bad accuracy, basically Death Final in cat form. This ends up being a pretty common pickup in the mixed attacker or lightweight format because that format is very tank heavy. Landing a zap on round open wins you the game. Maximal Zap is just more zap. Big numbers everywhere, and at 59 force, I do mean bigger. This is almost 50% more damage than Zap, which is already pretty good. Only a handful of techs in the entire game do more damage than Maximal Zap, so if your goal is to make sure even the heaviest tank is raised from the earth, you're picking up Maximal Zap. Mew is one of the biggest winners in the entire game of having access to its intelligence text without giving up any stats. Mixed attacker formats allowing for maximal zap is a serious boon because while the rest of the kit is set up to beat speed monsters, nothing screams anti-tank like a 59 force intelligence tech. Almost all of Mew's power techs are usable regardless of format, and for a long time Headbutt, Rushing Punch, and Million Blows was the go-to. That is until an enterprising young man decided to lean heavy into the sharp techs. Twiddling 2, Head Assault, and Scratch make up the core of a very cheap loadout that gives Mew a chance to swing a lot of techs, and more chances to really cash in on that high crit chance. Twiddling 2 is the nuke, but the way the build is set up, as long as Mew gets to attack 5 or 6 times, the odds are in his favor to win through a crit-enabled knockout. Rushing Punch would become less and less popular over time, and only a few remaining builds use Million Blows despite it being a strong tech. The cheap, crit-based loadout eventually became the most common way to build Mew, with different variations building off of the core for different types of tournaments. That young man changed the course of competitive Monster Rancher forever. And his name? Albert Einstein. Nah, I'm just kidding. Obviously, this is a story about a build I made and how it ended up being called the Moose Bones build. That's the whole conceit of the story. That's what the intro's about. Local kid made good. Mum Mew has the fastest guts rate of all Mews, but I don't really like Mum Mew. She had a huge part in the anime as one of General Durhan's henchmen, and... Why did they name it that? It's the wrong kind of show.
Sorry for not asking first, but we've taken weed with us.
Anyway, so like she's the best, but I've had a lot of success just running other Mews. A faster guts rate is obviously advantageous, but a 15 gives you a significantly higher chance to hit, so it's not like it's doom and gloom if you decide against running the brat stall. Now, personally, I don't get to be too masturbatory in these videos very often, so I saw the chance to shoot my shot, and I did.
There's gotta be a better way to say that.
You leaning into crits is what makes it as strong as it is, and I can't lie, it feels good to have not only been able to contribute in this way, but also have the scene ordain it with an indelible stamp. Mew is one of my absolute favorite monsters in the entire game, in the entire franchise, and I've raised maybe half a dozen for competitive play, so it genuinely means a lot to me to have been part of shaping its meta and how people view the monster in a competitive sense. It's not a huge thing, but there aren't a lot of builds and archetypes named after the people in the scene, so, you know, it's not lost on me. It's rare, because a nickname is one of the purest indicators of familiarity within a group of friends, and you can't just give one to yourself. So I appreciate it. And I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching another one of these. If you are a Patreon or YouTube member, I got big news. Every month we're going to be putting out a new video that we're calling Moose Bones Classics. They are old VODs that I think are like extremely funny, but I've never really had time or like the ability to like slot it into the channel in an organic way. The first one's coming out in September, and it's from a stream where I was playing Digimon Digital Card Battle, and I've been looking for a way to give people more content without like focusing too hard on like what is going to like actually make money on the channel. Because I'm gonna be honest, every time I make a video that's like not Monster Rancher related, it just like, it tanks. It does badly. The Pal World video was great, the Mega Knockdown video was great, but now I'm gonna actually have a place to post these without stressing too much about what YouTube thinks about it. The Nuzlocke aren't done. I have a couple of episodes left I still need to post. Sorry that's been taking so long. Forms for the DXBL are open if you want to start playing competitive. They're gonna be open for a few weeks. And yeah, hopefully I see you in a tournament, or just in the comments or whatever. I'll see you on the next one.